In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Kelly of Pistons Intellect to talk about the upcoming expectations of the Detroit Pistons season. Stay tuned for today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making me Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. We're on our way to 10,000 subscribers, so please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I just realized on Spotify, you can leave comments under specific episodes. So if you guys want to leave some comments under an episode, talk with me. I'll try to respond to some and interact with you guys. So, but also today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You'll hear more about FanDuel a little later. So, like I said, we are joined by friend of the podcast, Kelly. If you've been listening to the podcast, especially recently, I've been shouting out Jack a lot. Jack, I don't know if you've heard, but I've taken some of your content ideas. Like when you talk about the starting lineup, I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Let me tag on to that. Or there's another one. You made another graphic that I tagged on to. I always shout you out. You do great stuff. You guys can subscribe to his YouTube channel, Pistons Intellect. You can also follow him on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_313. Jack, how are you doing today, man?
I'm good, man, and I always appreciate the shout outs. I listen as much as I can. I love tuning in. You know, I was listening every episode when we were in that losing streak. So I love listening to you, whether it's in the losing streaks or the win streaks. Well, there's not many win streaks, but yeah, love jumping on the show, man, and yeah, excited to chat Pistons.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about this upcoming season. So I want to start it off. I want to get a lot from Jack, so I'm going to try not to talk as much. I want to hear from Jack's perspective because my listeners, they've heard me nonstop the last 2 months. Like during the dead parts of the season, they've heard me come on here and regurgitate a lot of the same stuff. You know, they know how I feel. I'm probably not as high as some people are on the upcoming team, but I think you are relatively high on this upcoming team. So that's why I wanted to get your perspective. So first place I want to start with, we'll eventually move into expectations of the starting lineup, expectations of some individual players that you're looking forward to seeing and what you think they could be. But I want to start with this overall team success this upcoming year. Team lost 68 games this last year. Everyone knows, worst season in franchise history. They won 14 games. Everyone knows. They've made some key additions this offseason. They've added Tobias. They've added Malik Beasley. They've added Tim Hardaway Jr. They brought back Simone. We know all that. Where do you think that leaves this team heading into the season? They do have one roster spot open, so maybe they do add something else. But as of right now, where do you think that leaves this team heading into this upcoming season?
I think, for me, expectations, before I get into a win-loss or that kind of thing, for me, it's establishing an identity. So I've heard you, Q, talk a lot about this team could be a middle-of-the-pack offensive team, and I tend to agree with that, with kind of the veterans they've added, the shooting they've added, and the way Trajan's kind of molded this team. So for me, it's establishing an identity. JB Bickerstaff's being known as a defensive coach, but, you know, is this team going to lean into offense or are they going to lean into defense? And how's that going to look? I think for me, that's number one, because I want to know what's this team's philosophy, because I feel like in the past 3 years, it's just been an absolute mess and the results have shown. So I think with the pieces they've added, they have kind of the tools to be, like you've said, a middle-of-the-road kind of offensive team that I do tend to think is going to struggle defensively. But I want to see this team each and every night be known for something, because that's what's been so disappointing to me, apart from the losses and that kind of thing. It's just this team just seems so lost in the past 2 years. And I think with the pieces they've added, Tobias Harris, bringing back Fontecchio, Malik Beasley, they have put pieces around Cade Cunningham for him to thrive, and for the other younger players to thrive with more space, not just Cade. Asar Thompson now, there is a heap of lineups that make sense for him, with even his lack of shooting, for him to actually thrive as someone who can drive, someone who can roll to the rim, someone who can even potentially improve his handle and create a little bit. So I think for me, that's like the number one thing for me. And what I want to see is develop, kind of be known for something. And then in terms of wins, I've got this team. I think anything below like 27 wins for me would be disappointing. And I say that knowing that's a 13-win improvement. And I actually did a study last off season.
I was going to bring that up because that was fantastic. I'm going to link that below. I want everyone to go check it out. I really loved reading that. That was a fantastic research thing you did. And I think every Pistons fan, and honestly, not even just Pistons fans, any fan of a team that was the worst team in the league of previous years should love this article you went in. So go ahead.
So from memory, teams since in the lottery era, which is since 1984, teams who finish with the worst record in the league tend to win an average. I think it was like 9 games extra the following season. So that puts the Pistons around 23 wins, which I've actually seen ESPN put out today. They had them around 20 wins and somewhere else had them in that same range, so the math there kind of makes sense. I know what I'm saying is technically an outlier going against my study and what other people are predicting, but I think with the talent they have and potentially some other teams looking to get into the Cooper flag race, maybe Detroit do, but I think they can win 27 to 32 games, somewhere in there. That's kind of what I'm expecting. I know I can be let down, but that's kind of my general expectations for the team.
So, like I said, I want to get into what your starting lineup ideas are because you've talked a lot about on Twitter your starting lineups, a death lineup for the team, a closing lineup, like all that stuff. I did see some people poke some fun at you about a death lineup.
I knew I was going to get that hate, but yeah, it's a bit of fun.
It was a really good graphic. So we'll get into that a little later. But I do want to follow up. So I have the team around 25 wins. That's my expectation. So we're not too far off. I'm on a little bit of the lower end, but we're not really too far off for like 2 wins difference. What do you think has to happen in order for them to get to that? Like you mentioned, establishing an identity. Do you think, like, for example, like if every young guy got better, I think everyone's thinking, okay, well, 27 or more wins, or like more than 27 wins is possible. For them just to get to 27 wins, what do you think has to fall in line in that path just for 27? Like I said, all the young guys improving probably means like 30 plus. Like if you get all the young guys and the veterans, then it's like, oh, okay, you had like literally the most perfect scenario happen and they're like a play-in team. Like that's what it is. What do you think has to happen in order for 27 to be reached?
I think they have to be probably hovering around 15th in the league at offense. Like I think it's all going to come from winning games on your home court and it's going to come from offense because I think obviously on your home court, I feel like role players in that kind of get into the game more and defend a little bit better. But I think it's going to come from their offense because when I look at the defensive pieces outside of Asar and Stu, there's some average defenders, but those are probably the only 2 defenders I trust every single night. So I think it's going to come from offense. I think it's going to come from Cade Cunningham being well into the all-star conversation and, potentially being an all-star if the Pistons are trending, hovering around that play-in type area. I think as well, either one of Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren has to improve like tremendously this season. Not both of them, not take a giant step, but either Jalen Duren's showing growth defensively and is still the same guy offensively, or Jaden Ivey's figuring it out how to play off Cade Cunningham. And then I think we just have to hope that I'm confident in this, but Tobias and the other veterans they brought in actually just remain as who they are, because that would be disappointing. I think we feel confident that Tobias is going to stay consistent and Tim Hardaway Jr. and Beasley, but they have to be who they have been in the past couple of seasons.
So last question, and then we'll move on to the starting lineup. So I completely agree with you. Like you said, I've talked about this on the podcast before about how the way this roster is constructed, that you have to lean offense for you to really get the most out of the immediate future. Maybe they don't because maybe they're worried about the long term, so they're not really focused on the immediate. I mean, who knows what they do? But like the roster says, this is going to be an offensive team. You should lean into it. My question is, they brought in JB Bickerstaff. He's not been known for offensive. We'll see how well he is, but he's been known as a defensive coach, not as an offensive guru or like an offensive X's and O's guy. That's not what he's been. My question to you is, how do you look at it? What's the perspective you look at it? I think there's 2 perspectives I've heard. I've seen one perspective that is, okay, he's not an offensive mind, so you went and got offensive players. So the offense should be fine, and then you just let him worry about the defensive side of the floor. And hopefully the offense just figures itself out because you have offensive players, and then he can try to get the most out of them defensively. That's one perspective. I guess this is the more pessimistic perspective is you went and got players that don't really match what your coach wants to do, and he wants to try to build a defense, but you haven't given him the pieces that can actually build that defense. And then he's not a great offensive, like we haven't heard of him being a great offensive mind, and therefore the offense doesn't get to 15th. It hovers around like 22nd. Which perspective do you think is what you should be looking through?
I think the first perspective you kind of went through there in the fact that I think defensively, I'm not sure how good this team will be. I think they're going to be bad, but hopefully he can start to build some principles, help the younger guys kind of figure out rotations, communication, just the basics, because I feel like that's kind of lacked in the past few seasons. And then I think offensively, Trajan's done a good job of bringing in a lot of shooters. And you kind of are honestly putting a lot of faith in Cade being able to still figure things out. But at least this time, as long as JB's not playing kind of 3 non-shooters on the floor and going to 2 bigs or starting 2 bigs, like as long as there's space for Cade, I think we're going to have to put a lot of trust in him kind of figuring things out in a more spread out floor. And then I do have some concerns, obviously, with like the backup kind of point guard position and just playmaking overall on this team. But look, there's going to be a heavy reliance on Cade, but I think Cade wants that. Like I kind of thought as a rookie, Cade might be a little bit more off ball, but he's fully leaned into kind of the Luka role in my eyes. And I'm all for that. But there's going to be a heavy reliance on him getting the offense going. And hopefully he can play more than 65, 70 games. Because if he's out, then I start to get a bit concerned.
Well, hopefully the team is not just tanking at the end of the year and he actually plays at the end of the year and we don't hear mysterious injuries happening to multiple players that have them sitting out games. So hopefully the Pistons are playing just at least competitive games at the end of the year to where we get to see the full roster all year. But coming up, I want to talk to Jack about what he believes should be the starting lineup for the Detroit Pistons this year. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers at ebaymotors.com. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, please go hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers. Also, leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So, Jack, I've seen you make, first of all, you do incredible graphic designs. Like, I love your designs that you make.
Appreciate it, man.
They get a lot of engagement. They get the community talking, get the community pumped up. So I really like it. I really enjoy it. One of the graphics you've made recently, we're talking about the Pistons starting lineup. So I think this is 1 year, and you can agree or disagree with me. I think this is the 1 year in the last 4 years that you truly have no idea what the starting lineup's going to be. Like, there's so many different combinations. Like last year, no one expected Killian Hayes to start, obviously, but I feel like all off season, everyone just oh yeah, it's gonna be Cade, Ivy, that's everyone thought that, and then I feel like the Monty screwball is doesn't count. We don't that doesn't. We just throw that out the window. But I think this year is the 1 year where we really are in the dark about what's the lineup going to be. There's so many different variations that could happen. So I just want to go back and forth. So what lineup do you think they're going to go with, and what's your thinking behind it? Why do you think they're going to go? What should be their thinking when they're developing this lineup, and why you ended up with yours?
So I've heard you talk a bit about the starting lineup, Koo, and I think everyone is in agreement that Cade Cunningham, Tobias Harris, and Jalen Duren are locks to start. So it's really the second guard position, the other forward position. And for my starting lineup, I have Cade, Ivy, Fontecchio, Tobias, and Duren. Putting Jade and Ivy in there it's been a real tricky kind of roller coaster ride with my kind of fandom, or whatever you want to call it, with Ivy. I was so high on him last season, and for probably the first half of the season, I put a lot of blame on kind of his struggles at times on Monty. But then the way he closed the season, particularly in like back end of March and April, you kind of were just left feeling like, man, once Cade went out, he just didn't have a moment. He had like one half against Memphis where he might have scored like 20 points. But apart from that, like, you didn't even know he was out there sometimes. And it's at the end of last season, I was kind of the thinking maybe he's someone you move in a trade, and that could still happen. But I think now that I've had a couple of months since the end of the season, that Monty's now gone, Troy Weaver's gone, all those changes have happened. The reason I've got Jaden back in the starting lineup is, one, I think and I know you can do these things with him coming off the bench, but I think when you draft Jaden at pick 5, you've drafted him to be Cade Cunningham's running mate, to start games, to be ideally your second scorer behind Cade. And I think we just need to see those two for the first half of the season, at least give it a shot if Jaden earns a starting position, to see if it works. Because last season, it just didn't work. And we didn't get a chance to figure it out in Jaden's rookie season. So are those two going to work? That's why I've put him there. And I'm a believer still in his jumper. I know the numbers last season regressed, at least from a catch and shoot standpoint. But I'm putting faith and stock that that's going to come around this season. And that's why I have him starting. And then I think Fontecchio, I have him starting just because of the stretch he had with the Pistons. I think he's an adequate defender. He's 6'8". He can't really create a heap, but he can do some stuff off the dribble. But just the shooting, the spacing he gives you. That's kind of the thinking behind mine. And then Cade, I don't need to talk about. Duren, whilst we have concerns defensively, I think his chemistry with Cade offensively is so tantalizing, and it also makes it so frustrating that he's just struggled so much on defense, because, man, if he can figure out the defense, him and Cade is a crazy partnership. And then Tobias, I don't think I need to talk about a lot.
So I think that's definitely, as far as like possibilities, I think that's probably towards the high end of the list of most likely starting lineups. I do think, though, that it's interesting that they have not gotten a backup point guard yet. So that tends to make me think that they might play Ivy as the backup point guard. If they do, now I'm one of the people that want them to go get Markelle Fultz. I would want them to go sign Fultz and let him be the backup point guard. If you want to start Ivy, then just play Fultz with whether it be Sasser or THJ or Beasley. Then you got your point of attack defender, you got your length, your guy who can initiate the offense, get to the rim, create for others. He can't shoot, but if you have someone next to him that can, you let him play his role. I would go get Fultz. But as of right now, they don't have a backup point guard. So that's what has me leaning towards they might bring him off the bench. But I do think even with that, like, your lineup is probably towards the high end of outcomes that they do end up going with. I've said on the podcast a few times, I would go with the only difference I have in your lineup is I'm going with Asar at the 2 rather than Ivy. And just my reasoning for it would be I want the Pistons to take advantage of Cade's size at the point guard position. And if you start Asar at the 2, you don't have anyone smaller than Cade. You can switch across the whole floor. I know the question is, can Asar and Duren play together? And I still have that question. I think they have to answer that this season. But the very limited sample that we do have, again, it's very limited. But the limited sample we have, 134 minutes with Asar, Duren, Cade, and Fontecchio. They were a plus 4.0 on the floor.
They were really good, yeah.
They had a 108.9, my goodness, defensive rating, and a 113.0 offensive rating. So they were really good defensively. If you look at all the Pistons' best defensive lineups, every single one has Asar in the lineup. So that's the one. I just struggle to keep your best defender off the floor, especially with JB being your coach. I don't know if he would do that. But if the team is to lean into the full offensive mind of this roster, I think that probably leans more to what your lineup is, that you have a Cade, You have Ivy that I'm not as high on anymore. I'll be honest, I'm probably more so out on him at this point. But him as a player, he's a guy that can get to the rim, incredibly athletic, draws free throws. You expect him to hit shots. Like, that's the idea of him, that he hits shots and he finishes around the rim. Like, he's a dynamic off-ball combo guard. Like, that's what you want from him offensively. You got Fontecchio spacing the floor, who was fantastic for the Pistons, what they traded for him. Tobias, like you mentioned earlier, knock on wood, he doesn't just fall off the face of the earth somehow. But if he just is who he's been, another offensive scorer. And then you got Duren, who's fantastic offensively and fits perfectly with Cade on the offensive end. So I definitely think if they go full offense, your lineup makes a lot of sense. And I do think it's probably one of the more likely ones that you see. My question back to you would be, what other lineups, if it's not that one, is there any other lineups that you think could work that you'd like to see, not using yours or mine? Is there any other lineups that you think, okay, I want Ivy to start, I want that lineup to be it, but if they go this route, this would also be pretty interesting?
So, yeah, Asar, for me, it was tough to keep him out of the starting lineup because of kind of everything you said. So the other lineup for me would be keep Cade, Tobias, Duren, and then you start Asar at the 3 or 4, whatever, and then you put in Beasley at the 2. And that means you have Ivy and Fontecchio, probably your first 2 off the bench, with Stu coming in as well. But yeah, you still have that shooting, you get the defense. So that's probably the other. I honestly like your starting lineup, and this is probably the third kind of variation.
Yeah, I like that one too. That one, I think, probably helps them when it comes to like crafting a rotation that they can stick to. I think going with mine makes it a little hard with the wing rotation because you got like 3 of your wings already in the starting lineup. So it kind of makes it hard with how you want to do your rotation. You can do it. You can just take a guy out and then, sub him back in early, whatever. But it does make it a little tricky. Like I mentioned with the backup point guard stuff, that's the only question I have about your lineup. It does make that maybe a little tricky. You have to, again, you just sub probably Ivy out first early and then get him back in for Cade. But it's a little tricky. With that one that you just mentioned, I think that one would probably be like the most smooth transition to like a bench lineup. So you already got your backup point guard off the bench. You got your wing scorer or sharpshooter off the bench. You got your backup 5 and Stu. And then you probably just fill in like THJ, I guess, like at the backup 2.
And
so then,
can I just say, like, I might sound a bit delusional here, but how nice is it to actually be able to like talk about different starting lineups and rotations? Like the Pistons actually have, and like we said, knock on wood, these veterans come through this season, but like just being able to have this conversation is so fun. And like, I'm not hell bent on any starting lineup. Like we have our 3 locks, I feel like, but I feel like these kind of make sense and feel like NBA rotations. Like, I just want to acknowledge that because the past 2 seasons in particular, man, like you kind of just, like you said, you had one starting lineup, maybe you mix one player out, but just being able to have some shooters, it's got me excited regardless of win-loss. Like, I don't know. I just need to say that.
No, I completely agree with you. I mentioned, like, I think 2 episodes ago that the team is probably the deepest it's been in a minute. Like, you have multiple wing options. Like, for all my life, I've been sitting here screaming the Pistons need wings. You need wings. You need wings. You need wings. And now they actually have, like, they have Asar. They have Tobias. They have Simone. They have Ron Holland. We haven't even brought him up. Like, they have Stu and Duren at the back of 5 or at the 5 position. You have your 2 guys there. Like, and then you have Cade, Ivy, and you got, if you want to include a Sasser, you want to include a B. Like, you have options throughout. I do think they're probably like their off guard role is probably their weakest, like as term as depth right now. Like I think THJ is more like a 3. So I think their 2 guard is between like Ivy, if they play him there, and Sasser, and kind of like Beasley. I think you have some concerns there, like defensively. I think that would probably be the one position and their backup point guard. But overall, like you mentioned, they are deep at multiple positions and they can choose multiple different variations of lineups. Like you mentioned, like the previous years, it feels like we were just like penciling in Livers because like he's the only guy who can.
I know.
And like
I remember throwback to 2019, like they were starting Wayne Ellington at the 3. So like you said, wings and the Pistons, since I've been a fan, has not really been a thing. Like they had Tobias and Marcus Morris for a bit there, but apart from those two, like I don't know, man.
Since Tayshaun, they just haven't had any. Like they
Legit.
drafted Tayshaun, and it was like that's enough for the next 20 years. We don't need wings.
Legit.
Like they just gave
Insane.
up.
So whilst I don't know what the win-loss is, I like being able to discuss lineups and have hope in that area.
Right. Exactly. I completely agree. But coming up, I do want to talk about now expectations you have for specific players this upcoming year. I'm gonna let Jack direct that convo. Whatever player he wants to talk about, we'll talk about them coming up. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. I've talked about them a lot the last few years. That's America's #1 sports book. But we have something a little different for you now. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. For all my NFL fans out there, you know just how big that is. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And outside of that, I've told you guys this many times. A few years ago when betting became legal in Michigan, I didn't know where to go, didn't know what to try out. I tried out FanDuel, haven't turned back since. Super easy to use, super self-explanatory, and most of all, super fun to use. So again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Again, download FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. And also, you can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket all the way through September 2nd with FanDuel.com. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Jack. So I'll let you take over from here. Do you want to talk about an X Factor guy? Do you want to talk about a guy that you're really excited about, that you believe in this year? Which way you want to go?
I want to have a conversation about Asar to start this one off. I do want to get to Cade briefly as well, but Asar Thompson for me is so intriguing because we saw so much potential last season. And in a weird way, while his season, he didn't get any accolades for all rookie teams. His season kind of ended abruptly with like kind of a scary hell scare. But like there was so like I feel like in a way he kind of exceeded my expectations, in a weird way, even though if you go back and look numbers and that, there's nothing that fully jumps out. So like he's such an interesting one for me this season because as we've spoken about, defensively, I don't think it's a question. Like I think he's the Pistons' best perimeter defender, maybe best defender overall. It's out of him and Stu, but I think he's more valuable at the wing position anyway. Offensively, he actually was hitting 40% of his corner threes post All-Star break. And it was only in 8 or 9 games and the volume wasn't ridiculously high, but he actually started to figure things out there a little bit. And I don't think he's going to shoot anywhere near that this season. But Fred Vincent coming in, I still think that's a bit of a long-term play. But I'm so intrigued to see Asar Thompson on offense this season because I just kind of mentioned the chemistry Cade had with Jalen Duren. I feel like Cade had some really nice chemistry with Asar, obviously in transition, but even like using Asar as a screener here and there. Like, I don't think that's something you want to lean into like every possession. Like, but I feel like with a player with like Cade's IQ and then Asar, who I actually think has a really high IQ and feel as well, I just feel like there's a real like chance Asar Thompson just really pops this season. And I know that's not crazy to say, but he's a guy I'm just so excited to see because I think his potential is like it's second on the team, I feel like, behind Cade, but there's like a crazy world where like
I know
don't
what you're
think
gonna
this will
say,
happen. It won't happen, but like the physical tools this kid has at 6'7", like he could be anything. So it's just like
I know what you're trying to say. There's a crazy alternative universe, and I feel it. That he like somehow has a higher ceiling than anyone on the team. Like there's an alternate universe where that happens.
Kawhi Leonard. He won't be that, but like, man, there's 1% of me that's like, if like that's the kind of thing you need to happen as well. Like I feel like, or the Pistons are gonna have to find a second star, but that's for further down the track. I'm just keen to hear your expectations with Asar because I'm so excited. Fingers crossed he's I think he's back training fully with the team, and his off season's going great. But I'm just so intrigued to see him this season.
Yeah, Trajan said, I believe like a month and a half ago at like, I think it was JB's press conference I was at. He said that Asar was actually that day in the gym doing full basketball workouts and he's been cleared. So sounds like that. After that, all I've heard is that was true and he's having a good offseason. So hopefully, like his health, number one concern. That was a scary thing to have your season shut down for, but it seems like all is well and he's going to be okay and ready for the season. As far as him on the court, everyone knows I've loved Asar since like pre-draft. I was so high on the Thompson twins. Like I love him and his brother so much. I think they're going to be such crazy players. Asar, what I'm interested with Asar is how JB decides to use him. Like that was my biggest issue with this past year is it felt like Monty never, I mean, there was a lot of issues with Monty, but like one of the things that he just felt like he never really knew how to use Asar and he just sat in the corner a lot. Like that's what they did. For me, at draft time, I said this numerous times on the podcast. For anyone who listened at that time, you can back me up. All throughout pre-draft, I said, Asar Thompson is my pick at the 5 if you believe in him as a secondary ball handler. If you believe he is going to be a secondary ball handler and he can be a secondary playmaker, he is easily your pick at 5. If you think he doesn't have that in his future and he's just an elite defender with crazy athleticism, he's going to fall to like 9th or 10th. If you only draft him if you believe in that secondary playmaking, they picked him at 5. I think they believe in that. But that was Troy Weaver. So all I've heard is that Trajan loves him, that he is incredibly high on him. But still, there is that sense of, okay, well, that wasn't Trajan's guy. So I'm just a little interested in that. I just want to know, are you going to put him on ball? Are you going to let him run some pick and rolls? Are you going to ask him to create for the offense? Not ISO, try to score for himself, but like put the ball in his hands, maybe off an off-ball screen, off a DHO, and let him get to the basket and have him make decisions. I think he's a high-level processor. Like you mentioned, a high-field guy, a high IQ. He processes the defense and what they're doing very quickly. He can make quick decisions. He's a very good passer. He was basically the point guard at OTE. So he has all of that into his game. I would like to see him play on ball a little more. I think improving his ball handle is more important than his three-point shot because that allows him to kind of impact the offense in different ways. I also think the shot is probably a little farther than I expected it to be. I did not expect him to be that bad shooting-wise this past year. But like you said, he did start to shoot a little better after the All-Star break. But yeah, I love Asar. I think he can be absolutely amazing. My thing with him, I just want to know what's their role for him offensively. Are you using him in screen roll? Are you using him in DHOs? Are you putting him on the ball? Like, what are you doing with him? Just please don't put him in the corner. Like, please just don't plant him in the corner. That would be terrible. But that's my thing with Asar. That's what I'm looking forward to with him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm so keen to see how JB utilizes him because Asar, like at the start of last season, like he was just everywhere, man. He was like flying around, steals, blocks, and like he was rebounding the hell out of the ball. And like I said, like I think his numbers with the veterans that this team's added and that kind of thing, and maybe like the minutes, even if he starts, like there's just more players on the roster, I feel like this season that are going to be pushing for minutes. I'm not too worried about the counting stats, but yeah, like you said, I just want to see offensively him find a rhythm, him be involved here and there. Yeah, because like the potential is crazy. Like some of the things he did last season, like the players he locked down, like the best like scorers in the league, like he was shutting them down in one-on-one matchups. Like the numbers back it up. That's crazy. So there's so much potential there. And as an athletic wing, like we spoke about the lack of wings, like they've got a couple now, and Asar, I think, has the highest potential of any of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I want to ask you this question. Who is the X factor for this team this upcoming year? I had a tweet like 3 days ago, and then I recorded an episode about this. My answer is Jalen Duren. Now, you can disagree. I'd love to hear your perspective of who you're picking. But I went with Jalen Duren. I felt like within the realm of realistic possibilities, I thought him improving defensively is like that would change everything. If he's able to improve defensively, I don't know. I'm interested. Like I said, I'm interested to hear your perspective and see where you stand. But I can't see. I really can't see anything else from Ivy or Nassar that I think they could realistically do this year that would impact this team's win-loss more than Jalen Duren becoming not trash defensively. Like if he became an average defender, Like, I think that impacts anything. I think that impacts the team more than anything else I can think of. So that was who I picked as the X factor. Who's the X factor for this team for you?
So the first two names that come to mind is Ivy and Duran, because I feel like they're just the two players. It's like we kind of still don't really know. We know who they are, but like 2 seasons in, we don't know if they're like long-term pieces. Like I feel like Cade is, and Asar, I would like to think is more of a long-term piece. But I actually was going to say Duran, but I think you've kind of outlined it on the pod previously and just then. Like his defense not only is the biggest X factor for this season, but I feel like for this young core overall, and this team's trajectory at least in the across the next few years, if he can take a step defensively this season and show real progress, like that helps alleviate quite a few issues and kind of helps you continue to mold this team. But for the sake of a better conversation, I'm just going to say Ivy, because like I feel like if the jump shot actually became a thing this season where he's knocking down his open ones and teams aren't just leaving him every night and he draws players off of Cade, and if he figures things out more with his handle and could show something defensively, like I'm asking a lot here, but I think if he could kind of, once again, he wouldn't become an all-star this season or anything, that would be crazy, but just become that kind of perfect running mate for Cade, that where you have Cade, who's more like your slow, manipulative, like type of player, but then you have him saddled with Ivy, who in theory attacks, can hit open threes and do a bit of playmaking, take the pressure of Cade. Like I think that also changes the trajectory, because you have your starting backcourt now, you have Asar as a wing, and then maybe the question is on Jalen Duran. Like if he can't figure things out defensively, you still try to look for that spacing big then maybe. So I think for me it's Ivy, but I think Duran is the one.
So what you mentioned with Ivy, I think it goes even deeper with him. You kind of hinted at it. If Ivy, this is coming from someone, I think all my listeners know this, whether they like it. A lot of them don't like this about me, but it is what it is. I'm pretty low on Ivy at this point, but I'm able to see like what the idea of him is. Ivy becoming like a legit shooter. Let's say he became, let's just say he doesn't improve his finishing. Let's say he stays the same defensive, but shooting, he takes that step shooting wise, and he's a really good shooter this year. That really that brings future possibilities of, okay, is there a future where you can run Cade, Ivy, Asar, Ron Holland, and Duran together in like 3 years? Like, is that something that could happen? Because they have to develop as shooters. That's the only way that 5-man core, if we want to call it a core, can survive. Because right now, I think it's very clear that one of them, maybe even 2 of them, will be gone in like a year and a half. Because you can't run not 5 non-shooters. Cade can shoot, but like you get it. Like you can't run 4
I get you.
Like non-shooters on the. It's just not possible in 2024. But if Ivy were to make that jump as a shooter, then it's like, okay, we got one of them down. He can space the floor. Cade can shoot. Can we just get one of Asar or Holland? Can we get like something from them? Now that gives you more belief of it. So I think Duran would impact more directly this year, and kind of like you said, like the foundation of the team too, like with just knowing that you have a backbone defensively that isn't just like going to break every play. But like with Ivy, I think Ivy not only helps in the short term, he also gives you more hope long term for like, okay, maybe we can make this 5-man core work. Maybe it could eventually work down the road. So I see that as well. Obviously, we've mentioned Asar. Before we wrap up, go ahead.
I just have one more, and we can hit on this very quickly. What do you think is more important for Cade this season? Him continuing to increase kind of his scoring and I guess points per game, or him becoming an average defender? Because he has all the tools. Like, and I feel like we give Ivy a lot of heat for being a bad defender. But I feel like Cade, he showed some stuff as a rookie, which was impressive, and in college and that kind of thing. But I think defensively last season, understandably, maybe like he was pretty poor. So what do you think is more important, scoring for Cade or defense this season?
I'm gonna sound like, when I answer this, I'm gonna sound like one of those Hooper versus Hooper versus basketball player people.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say scoring, because it's more so because I think he is an average defender. It's just last year went so badly he just checked out.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I guess the better way of saying is I think he has the tools and he already can be a good defender. Like, I think all it takes is him just locking in and the team not being horrific. Like, I think that's going to happen. Scoring, I think there's things he has to improve on. Like, I think he has to become a better finisher. I think he needs to become or draw free throws better, turn a lot of those rim attempts into free throws. So, like, I think he has to improve those things. Defensively, I think he just needs the team, or he needs to lock in more. Let me not just give him an excuse. He needs to lock in despite what's going on. Like, the team needs to be like not trending towards the worst ever and people just checking out. And he'll be average at that point. But I'm gonna go with scoring because of that. And I think from your star, I saw Josh, I think his name is Josh Eberly on Twitter. He writes for Hoop Magazine. He does a lot of stuff. People know him. He mentioned to me that one of the more impactful things for teams is your superstar really improving that efficiency. It's one of those things on the margins that your superstar going from like 23 like 27 on really good efficiency really impacts your team and impacts wins. So that's why I'm gonna go with that. But if I thought Cade didn't have the tools, or he actually, I just don't think of Cade as a bad defender. If I thought he was a bad defender, I probably would go defense. But I can't. I don't. Maybe if he struggles defensively this year, I'll change my stance.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you. I want to see him become that true number. Like, I think he's the number one option, but I want to see him become like 27 points per game, get to that point at some point in his career. But I do think defensively, like, he could set a better tone because he's the leader. That's who everyone looks to, even the vets. I feel like Cade's got that kind of aura. I know that's an annoying word, but about him. But it's true. It's true, man. He does. So I think that's where I'm coming from with that one. Is I just want to see him set the tone a bit more, because last season, even in that losing streak, like, he was killing it offensively, but sometimes,
he was definitely
he's a young guy on a horrible team, but it felt like he's checked out a bit. So just don't want to see that this season.
I agree with you. And we'll wrap it up here. One of the reasons why I'm so high on Cade is because he's so self-aware and his team's so self-aware. Like, I was talking with his team. I talk with Ashton a lot.
Yeah.
I was talking with them a few weeks ago, and they, like, I didn't even bring it up. Like, they just brought up, like, and man, he gotta get his ass going on defense, man. He can't keep checking out. Like, they're very self-aware and very, like, critical of themselves. So that's one of the reasons why I'm high on Cade. But I wanted to bring that up because you did bring up his defense. I just wanted to buffer it and say, like, that's been something that was been brought up by them as well. Like, hey, get your ass going on defense, basically. So
love to hear
it. But all right, Jack, appreciate you coming on, man. Let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and over on YouTube. Yeah,
guys, you can follow me over on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_3on3, and then on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Pistons_Intellect. So appreciate all the love, and thanks for having me on, Coop.
Absolutely. Make sure you guys all go check out his podcast, his YouTube, TikTok, Twitter. Go check him out. Jack is great. He does great Piston stuff, great designs, great graphics on Twitter, great content on YouTube. Make sure you guys go support him, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys for making today your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe on the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace out.